Ecosystems Through Diversity, and we're here at FOSSASIA in Singapore, so thank you for all coming, and thank you for everybody who's online as well. So who am I? Well, I've been involved in FOSS for almost 2 decades now, doing a lot of different work in regards to that. Currently, I'm the Executive Director of IEEE SA Open, which is IEEE, most of y'all hopefully know who that is. SA is the standards portion, and Open is where we're doing work to support open source, open hardware, and open data in those standards. And so we have our own platform for doing that. And so some of the stuff that I'll be talking about comes from all of these different areas where I'm both doing this work at IEEE. There's a lot of stuff that's happening in regards to InterSource. On the board for Open at RIT, which is the University, Rochester Institute of Technology, and that's their open source office. And then also working with Public Code and Government, and working on a bunch of good governance initiatives, including the OSSPG, which is the Open Source Software Project Governance best practices that we're doing with IEEE standards. So that's what a lot of this is going to be based off of. So, you know, a lot of this is like built upon some of the stuff in the past, and so some of the other talks that I've given in regards to this kind of leads up to this. It's kind of a culmination of all of this different work. So occasionally it ends up being very high level, and I apologize. But if you want any additional work in regards to that, I can give you links to all of the other presentations because the majority of them are online. One of the major ones is why we started doing these diverse advisory groups, which I'll talk about in a little while. And then also talking about how when you get this diverse advisory group, you actually create a village, which is also, you know, the campy word that I use for an ecosystem. So, and then also I gave a talk about unconscious gatekeeping and tools, which is one of the ways you can accidentally hurt your diversity. And also there's been a lot happening in the EU in regards to digital or data autonomy. And so a lot of that also drives off of this. So first of all, what do I mean by an ecosystem? And to be quite honest, I started adopting this language because of Stephen Wally. He gives a bunch of different talks about how open source is not a business model, and instead we need to be thinking about the ecosystem picture in regards to it. And I think that that's a beautiful word for doing it, because I normally think of it in regards to the biological context of where you can create these little ecosystems that all really work together. And if you forget anyone, you're not going to be sustainable. And so that's why diversity becomes such a key element. Very few ecosystems work correctly with too much singularity. They need to have variety. So when I look at ecosystems right now in the open source world and the free and open source world, I think of all of these different groups that are coming together. Right now, I feel like we're in a third era of free and open source. Our first era was developers doing stuff for developers. People don't like to admit it, but we were a bit supported by government and academia in regards to that. And so we were able to do all of this really amazing work like Apache and Linux and things of that nature. And then we entered into our second era, which is when corporations started to get involved. Thank God we had the OSI in regards to that, because they really held the line in regards to what it meant to be open source and really held to that culture and forced a lot of different entities to adhere to that, because otherwise I feel like we could have lost our soul in regards to it, because corporate has different agendas often than we do as volunteers. And so it was very good to have that. But I feel like right now we're embarking into this third era. And in this third era, it's going to involve educational institutions, foundations, and governments. Right now, you know, especially with what happened with Log4j and things of that other nature, and what's also happening in Europe in regards to data autonomy, governments are getting involved. And I feel like I'm kind of uniquely positioned in regards to standards for that, because way too often, thankfully, in some ways, maybe not in others, they first come to standards to look at what the standards are before they start making those policy decisions. But I feel like open source has not been as involved in that to make that good transition. So we do have to think about that. So that's why I included all of these stakeholders that I did, because I really do feel to get to that third level of the ecosystem, we need to consider all of those groups and all of those stakeholders for when we're creating the projects that we're creating. So what do I mean by sustainable? I mean that it can be maintained. I don't mean that it has to always keep growing. We don't have, that's buying into capitalism, and I don't think that's what we actually have to do. I think that we do have to have our ability to grow and let other things die while other things come up too. And so with sustainability, I don't think it has to mean constantly growing, but I think it does have to mean a certain amount of reliability. Like what happened with DNS and some of those other different tools, those tools did not need to keep changing. They were good. It's just that they didn't have a sustainability enough so that when the few errors that did come up or those different things happened, we weren't able to evolve because we had let those stagnate. So instead, how do we actually look at making sure that those things don't stagnate and they continue to be viable and upheld? And so what do I mean by diversity? Well, I'm going to be honest with you, I mean all of it. If you go and look at this one thing, they list 39 different types. I think way too often we get kind of wrapped up in limiting those definitions. And those definitions are good. We need labels. It makes our lives easier, right? How do we measure something if we don't create those? But at the same time, I ask that we not limit ourselves in regards to this. Oftentimes in the corporate world, when we talk about diversity, we're talking about legally protected statuses, right? We're talking about sex and gender and race and religion and age and disabilities and things of that nature. But I want us to go beyond that. I want to talk about roles. I want to talk about locations. I want to talk about languages. I want to talk about experience levels. I want to talk about all of those because, when I sit there and say it takes a village, I really do mean that. I really do mean that it takes a diverse village. And especially for a lot of the work that we're doing, it's worldwide, it's global. We need to look globally in regards to doing that. So we need to look at all of those different forms of diversity. So right now, we've got some ecosystems out there. This is one of the ones that I love to do. Notice it spills off of the edge. CNCF, this is their landscape diagram. I yanked it off of their website, hope they don't mind. But you can sit there and see what happens when the landscapes get big, right? This is a big ecosystem. This is where the majority of us start off at in regards to our open source projects. We've got some code, maybe we've got a little bit of a community going on. If we're lucky, we've created some processes. Maybe we've gone a little bit beyond just the whole maintainer-contributor relationship, and I've kind of diagrammed a little bit more than that. Hopefully we have some governance. Not necessarily do all groups have governance yet, right? That's why we're trying to do the OSSPG. But there's a big problem with that. And that when does that open source project become an ecosystem, right? You're going to need a certain amount of sustainability. You're going to need a certain amount of maturity, and you need a certain amount of reach to get there. So we run into this huge gap, right? Where you have these open source projects, they want to get to an ecosystem or something resembling, obviously we all don't want to be CNCF, but we want to get to somewhere where we can actually bridge that gap. And there's a lot of information on doing a project, and there's actually a fair amount of information as to those ecosystems, but there's not a lot bridging the two, explaining how you can get there. And the biggest problem that I see that happens is money. You sit there and you have an open source project, we're all in there, we're doing our thing, we're trying to figure it out, but how do we figure out how to handle the money question in regards to when we want to create that ecosystem? And a lot of times it ends up being a chicken and egg scenario. I don't know if Tr2-1 always, if everybody knows about that cross-culturally, but it's when you're in a bind where you need something to do something, you need that to do that. And so you just end up in this infinite loop, bad recursion. And so I feel like money incurs this all of the time, where people are like, oh, we don't want to give you money because you don't have all of these things in place. Oh, but it takes money for me to get all of those things in place. Even opening a bank account requires that, right? You have to be a business, which means you have to do filings, which means you have to be a taxable entity, and da-da-da-da-da-da-da. It causes a lot of problems. There's some groups out there that are trying to help with that, like Open Collective, which, yay, thank you. Thank God you're doing that. But I feel like there needs to be more. So to me, one element in regards to how you can make that jump is diversity. you have to go out and look for other different roles. You know, in the earlier group that I talked about, when you're talking about open source 1.0, you know, is developers and developers. Those are not always the same people you want to make that growth, to leap that gap. You want to make sure that you've actually gone through and created this actual ecosystem. And so that means having things like evangelists who are going around and talking well about your stuff, doing social media, having event organizers and writers and artists, and, you know, most especially the users themselves. I had a great conversation this afternoon with Alma Linux, and that's a huge push in regards to what they did and why they're doing it the way that they are, is because they wanted to make sure that users had a really good voice in regards to that. So at IEEE, one of the things that we did to stress this was we created these advisory groups that advise the open source committee that answers to the board. And what they do is we purposely broke them out to where we have a community advisory group, which represents the users and nonprofits. Because we are a nonprofit entity, we're a 501c3, which in America means a member-driven organization. So our members and our board makes the budgetary decisions. So it's pretty hardcore in regards to that. It's not a trade association. It is, it works that way. And then we created a marketing advisory group, which is a little bit of a misnomer because it includes just more than marketing. It's like design and for a place for a lot of the artistic things to exist. And then they also do things like open source intelligence and all of these other different aspects. They created a social media toolkit, things of that nature. And then we have the technical advisory group, which is similar to what most of y'all are used to seeing projects get when they reach a certain size, of having a technical steering committee that makes a lot of those technical decisions in regards to architecture and features and what direction the software goes into. So we purposely added these additional ones. You know, I'll admit, I totally cribbed from the Linux Foundation on that one. I worked on Hyperledger, and we had a marketing steering committee, and I loved it, and I loved the work that they did. And so that's why I brought that over in regards to the advisory group. And then I also saw how some of the Apache ones actually had the community one as well. They kind of owned more things like codes of conduct and things of that nature to make sure that everything stayed nice and friendly. And I kind of expanded the scope. But, you know, it was lessons learned from other open source projects. And so for doing that, you know, it's about, when you want to bridge that gap, you have to remember that it's more than just code. Because once you start doing the money parts and you start figuring those out, you have to go out there and figure these other things out. You need to talk about marketing, doing the different research, working with designers and architects. And, you know, here's the one that always gets some people a little bit in a tizzy. You do have to talk about management. It doesn't mean top-down, hierarchical, dictatorial style management that some of y'all experience in your career. It is very much so not that. It's still driven from a volunteer basis, but it, you know, managers, to me, a good one, helps facilitate communication. And so it ends up helping with that in regards to the management. It's not a top-down decision-making thing. Instead, it's a, hey, did you know that so-and-so is going to go work on this feature and you're working on that feature? Maybe you two could work together, you know, things of that nature. And that way you can get to things like quality and safety and maturity, because that's the next thing that we have to scale. With that 3.0 level, where we have to deal with governments and when we're dealing with academic institutions and nonprofits, we really have to be careful about what we're doing. We're entering into an age where, you know, I feel like it's just like electrical engineering back when IEEE got started, right? Where Nikola Tesla and Edison were doing, you know, Edison going and like electrifying poor elephants. Like, how horrible is that? But standards needed to be created because they were endangering people. And we're seeing that with software now, right? We're watching things that end up being dangerous in regards to what we're doing and how we're doing it. And we need to have that more for us for making that next jump into that next level. And so that's why we're seeing things like OpenSSF being created and the Foundation for Public Code and all of these other different entities, because we do realize we need to address the safety, maturity, and quality issues. So here we have some of the elements of a successful one as to how you get to that. Again, the diversity, I think, plays a big role in regards to it, in that if you don't have the inclusive processes, you won't get to where you need to be. And I really do feel that inclusive is the next step that you need to take in regards to diversity. It's like, okay, you've got all the people there, listen to them. please listen to them. Listen to how you probably have to change some of your processes. Listen to how you might have to do something different in regards to governance. We're watching that happen right now with codes of conduct. You know, I got to watch that front and foremost in regards to Drupal. You know, you really want to be there and help take care of those types of issues. There's a bunch of studies out there. The Harvard Business Review did this whole thing for the past 20 years about diversity and all the wins that you get. They found that like that businesses that had more diverse governing groups made 19% more profit. So there's a bunch of different wins that happen, and these are some of the different ones that you automatically get when you have diversity, and you have the inclusion processes for that. So without doing the inclusive ones, your diversity will go away. If you don't include people and listen to them, you will lose the different things. The ones that I'd like to highlight for us most especially, tools and governance. You cannot depend purely on Git, be it GitLab or GitHub or Gitly or whatever. That is not inclusive. That's not inclusive to handicapped people. That's not inclusive to all the different diverse roles that you have. Oh yeah, go put your accountant in GitLab and come back and talk to me about that afterwards. You'll have an accountant who wants you dead. You can't do that with governance either. There has to be governance. I know that we're working on an open source governance standard, but what that is it's about shoulds, because governance reflects your culture. And if you don't create governance from that inclusionary process, you're going to have problems. And to be quite honest, if you're not inclusive, are you really open? Are you really embodying that whole thing that we've been trying to work for so long in the past 3 decades? I would say philosophically, you're probably not. And then once you get there and you have all of this, then you have the resilience and the sustainability that we're all really here trying to achieve. Is by going in there and doing that, then you'll have all of those processes. You'll have the marketing you need. You'll have the ability to bring in a community and keep people there because they love it and they want to keep doing what they're doing. You'll be able to get the funding that you need. You'll have all of those different pieces if you go through and address those parts. And then, of course, the other thing is then you get the safety, security, and maturity. So one other major element is looking at the diverse governance. If you don't have inclusive leadership, you're going to have problems. What does your steering committee look like? If it's all just corporate representation, you're not going to have it. You have to make sure like your users are in there. You have to make sure your developers are in there. You got to make sure that those people all come from different walks of life. And then you'll have much better governance than if they all look the same and they're all doing the same thing. You know, look at ChatGPT. You can tell that it was written by a bunch of dudes. It sounds like an overconfident 25-year-old white male intern. You know, diversify, people. Come on, you can do it. You know, one thing that I like to sit there and see is, do you have relationships with other nonprofits who represent some of these different groups of people? If you do, then you're going to get to where you need to be. You want diverse sponsorship. You don't want to go for just one company giving you all the monies. It's very problematic. It's not going to do well. And then what happens when that one business leaves? You will not be sustainable. And also try to think of other revenue streams. You know, with IEEE, we have membership. That's a great way to do it. You know, it's not always accessible to everyone, but you can do sliding scale. There's a lot of other different things that you can do. You can figure out other ways of making money. You can do training. You can do certifications. You can do all of these other different things. Look towards that as well. Don't stay just in regards to expecting sponsorship from other corporations. It's not a healthy place to be, because then you will always be beholden to them. And if you incorporate all of these different things, it's a lot, I know, but then I believe that you will truly obtain sustainability and will be able to grow and keep things going. And thank you. Here's some of the links to some of the studies. If you want a copy of the slides, I'll send them to you. And thank you so much for having me. I really have enjoyed being here in Singapore. The food has been amazing, and I can't wait to go to the botanical gardens tomorrow. So yes, thank you all. Do we have time for questions or anything? Or, oh, yes.
I'm just wondering whether it's useful to expand your the sustainability portion by adding a word in front of it, which means evolutionary sustainability or evolvable sustainability.
Evolvable sustainability. I think, yeah, that's a
underscores what you were talking about, the challenge of sustainability.
It does underscore those challenges, because you can be sustainable at a lot of different levels, right? We don't all have to grow to be CNCF, right? We can be sustainable on these other different levels if we address some of those, properly. And I think that's very true. I think sometimes some projects might be too small that they do need to come under an umbrella, like, Apache and Eclipse and Linux Foundation, and we're also trying to do that at IEEE. But I do believe that a lot of these groups should be able to do it independently and be able to evolve from one size up to the other, where you should be able to be sustainable with a smaller group. So that's one thing that we're trying to figure out right now, is how do we assist that? And I know that that's one of the things that governments are also trying to address. I'm constantly having conversations with governments, their standards bodies, and global nonprofits, because they want to invest money into open source, but they don't always know how to go about doing that correctly. Like right now, I had a big conversation about procurement. How are one of us supposed to go and get procurement money? Biden just sat there and said all of these billions of dollars are supposed to be spent on open source. And I'm like, yeah, and what's your procurement path? Are we going to apply for NSF grants? Because I think I'll kill myself first again before I have to do one of those. But it's not a sustainable thing. And so we do have to look forward in regards to how do we evolve to do that level of sustainability. So anything else? Yes?
I have a question about open source governance and decision making in groups. If you have a diverse group of people that are in different governance roles and are required to kind of come together to make decisions, but live all across the world in different time zones, speak multiple languages, how can you effectively come together to make decisions despite this?
Yeah, so it was a question about governance and how do you handle the global impact in regards to governance when you have barriers like time zones and languages and even cultural ones. How do you actually deal with that? Right now, I am sad that I feel like the majority of tooling has, abandoned us in regards to that. And it ends up being, as Arish was like, a very controversial topic, in regards to like how standards and consensus is done across the world. Everybody has their own little flavor in regards to how to go through and do that and what is the right one. I don't think that there is always a defined answer in regards to that. I think it is one of those things where you do have to always be active listening in regards to that and figuring out the different ways to go and include that. When I was at Hyperledger, one of the ways that we did that is, and this isn't always my ideal way of doing it, but it worked for us, is I put everybody on Confluence so that at least we could have multi-language support. At least all of the working groups could always post their meeting minutes and their findings and their studies and all that kind of stuff. And then everybody could translate it so that we could, work together better with one another to figure those different things out. And that way, when the steering committees were making their decisions and judgment calls, they could look at that compendium of evidence and go, oh, this is where these things are at. This is what's actually going on and what's happening here. And so I think one key element is probably the centralization and understanding the asynchronous aspects, and then also the localization portions, I think are going to be key and crucial. I'm hoping that open source can come together to try to create some of that. That's one reason why I'm so excited to be a part of the Foundation for Public Code, because that's, some of the different discussions that were happening. And I think that that is happening on a global level right now among all those different groups, especially with the work that we're doing, trying to incorporate open source and open data and open hardware into standards. Suddenly everyone's realizing, oh, how does that governance and consensus process work? And we're definitely going, oh, well, how about here? Well, how about over here? Can we do this? So yeah, it's definitely not a solved problem, but I think it's one of those things where working together, we can hopefully get there. Of course, I might be building the Tower of Babel. I don't know. Thank you. Yes.
I got one question. This is got to do IEEE standards.
IEEE standards, yeah.
They are not available at no cost.
Yes, it's true. They're not available at no cost. One of the things that we've been working on is trying to figure out with certain standards, how can we make them free and open? Open source and open standards are not the same thing. They're very different things. They evolved in very different ways. The open standards means basically everyone is open to participate in them, and so people, they can have this diversity of voices that they need. But right now we're looking at some different models because, like for the OSSPG, how are we going to make sure that that's free afterwards? For any of the other different open source style standards that we're doing, how do we make sure that that is? And we're working on some different revenue streams to make sure that it's sustainable, because with IEEE, it is a 501c3, it is member driven, but we want to make sure that we don't accidentally, cut off our legs while we're doing the different aspects of it. And so we are working on some of those different ones. And I hope to be able to publicize some of them in the next year. Yes?
On the same question, back to the GET program, things like the energy series are available free of charge.
Yeah, the 7000 series is available.
Is there short answer to what the reasoning is for that set versus others?
So the way that I understood it is we got sponsorship for doing that for the 7000 series, but it's actually a little bit awkward right now because I kind of got chastised by Kalia over at IIW because she's like, it's not free. And I was like, well, it is free. The problem is if you went through Explore, it wasn't obviously free. You have to go through the website, and then it's free on the website. And one of the reasons we did that is because of the sponsorship pieces, right? So you could go through there and get them for free. And so that's one of the things that we're trying to logistically figure out right now is how do we actually go through and do that to make sure that it is all sustainable, because we do spend a lot of money doing support and doing all these other different technical aspects for them, because we don't want to accidentally eat ourselves, right? We want to sit there and make sure that we're consistently there, because we are not profit making. That's not what we're here for. And so that's a very big deal to us. Yeah, thank you. Thanks everyone. Thank you for coming.
We'll start with, let's do,
Can you mute your tab?
Mhm.
You go to the Firefox browser.
Yeah, I got you.
No, I mean the streaming.
Oh, this side.
Yeah, you can right click.
Computers. Look at us acting like we know what we're doing. So I was going to start with the caveat that is, when I first submitted this talk, I thought that I was going to have 45 minutes. Clearly, that is inaccurate because I can't read the screen. So we're going to run through essentially the very beginning of what I wanted to talk about. And we will definitely have questions, and I'm around for all kinds of conversations throughout today and even tomorrow. So let's run through it. We're not going to have much time for fluff, like I said, but this is me. I've been around, I've done some stuff. If you have questions about that, that's easier to talk about, not here. But we're just going to jump into it. I also think I'm really funny. I hope it's okay. The thing that we're going to kind of talk about, which is a little bit muddy in the spaces where we operate, is the definition of open source. If you're here, you probably know this. This definition of open source comes from the OSI. We are all familiar, we've seen it. Essentially, it says if you are releasing code under a license that allows reproduction, redistribution for free, that generally that's an open source license. If you want to go look at them and spend many days with many cups of coffee like I did, the link at the bottom of the slide will show you all of the OSI approved licenses. It's very fun. It's a lot of time. Be prepared for that. But like I said, if you're here, you're already familiar with open source. You know open source is a great way for new developers to get real world coding experience, real world collaboration experience. It's a great way for people who have been around for a while, like me, to give back to a community that you've gotten so much from. It's a really great thing. But there's always this kind of like uncomfortable spot that you end up with when entering a new open source community. To be clear, I'm going to assume that once you get to the spot that I'm talking about, you've already done all of the initial work. You've decided where you want to work, you've decided what you want to look at, you've decided like what languages you want to work on, you've decided what your goals are when you contribute to open source, you've decided, you've identified your strengths and weaknesses, all of that kind of stuff. You've already gone through. You're evaluating projects, evaluating where you want to put your time, your investment. If you haven't, go find a guide. Google it. It's very simple. This is one that I found that was generally, when I skimmed it, pretty comprehensive. It's a great place to start. You can also find these slides later, so if you want to take pictures, you can, but you don't have to. But there are millions of guides. Go pick some. The thing that none of those slides or none of those guides seem to address is money. As much as we don't like to talk about money in open source, you can't do open source without money. It's not possible. Even if you are a one-person shop doing a project that you care about, you are investing your time, and no matter how much you make it work, your time is worth money. Don't devalue yourself, right? So this open source code, this open source definition also doesn't talk about money. There's no mention of how these things get funded in whether or not it's defined as open source, right? So I thought with myself a whole bunch about how I was going to break this down. But I ended up in this spot where you're dividing. The first thing we're going to do is exclude all of the single contributor, single funding, like you and your buddies got together and made this thing projects. Because we're talking about bigger communities that have real money behind them, and they're going to be broken down into either corporate backed or foundation backed. For corporate backed, We're talking about things like Automatic, Nginx, Chef, Red Hat. Like there are many, many companies that have successfully monetized an open source project, or in whatever way it happened. There was a project that has now become a product, and these companies make a lot of money and sustain an actual, like, very big business next to an open source project. When we're talking about foundation backed, that can be broken down into two groups. Like we were talking about just 10 minutes ago. These are these big foundations that become homes for a lot of very small projects, or very big projects for that matter. The Linux Foundation, the Eclipse Foundation, the Apache Foundation. There's all kinds of each of these places have, hundreds if not thousands of projects that they're providing cover for, whether that's legal stuff or just a marketing machine or anything like that. These are very real problems that can't be solved when you're an off and on your own independent thing that require money. And these foundations go out and do the fundraising for you and then offer you a home for that stuff. The other option is a single project foundation. Single project foundations that you're probably very familiar with, well, at least two of them, are the Rust Foundation, the GNOME Foundation, and I wouldn't get away with not adding a plug for my foundation, the Alma Linux Foundation. We are all backing one specific project. There might be a couple of other like small things in there, but our focus is one thing, right? We have funding coming from sponsors, and that money goes directly into our primary project. I'm going to pause here because I want to make very, very clear, I am not making a judgment call. I can't tell you one is better than the other. There are different motivations, and that's what we're going to talk about. There's no right or wrong way for you to walk into a room and decide where you want to put your time. I'm not going to make that call for you. I might have opinions, but I'm not going to tell you which way you have to do it. But if we're looking at this situation, the motivations are where we have to decide. If you walk into a project that you say you're using Chef, say you are extremely excited about Chef, you love it, you want to fix a bug or contribute a feature, and then you get to watch that feature get used and adopted by other people, you're going to get the same amount of satisfaction as you would whether or not Chef was a product being sold somewhere, right? It's still open source, it's still participation in the same way. You still get to be excited about it. It is very likely that you're going to encounter a situation where you want a feature and say you don't have the time to put into it at that time, or you need help from the company that is backing it. The company is going to have to balance customer requests with open source community requests. That is the thing that they have to put together. If their customers are asking for something that is counter to what you want, the money is going to come into play. I'm not going to say it's always wins, but it's definitely going to come into play for them. So that's the thing. Just when you walk in a situation, you have to understand the motivations. And then with the single project foundations, same thing. You've got fairly, even in this case, fairly secure funding, right? The money is there, but you can be fairly sure that what they're doing is what the community wants them to do. It's going to be things that are asked for by the community. Very unlikely, especially if they have diverse funding, they're not going to be focused on any one thing that needs to be provided. Multi-project foundations, especially the massive ones, the communities are going to be doing whatever they want with very little oversight from the foundation. But that's, again, it's all about participation and how people contribute in the way that they want to. Occasionally, when you walk into a small project, it looks a little bit chaotic. You're going to walk in and want to say, I have this great idea. I have this thing that I would like to give you. And the floor is going to be on fire. And it's going to feel a little uncomfortable. that is not necessarily an indication that everything's terrible. It is very real when you bring a bunch of people together with different ideas about what they want to do and different amounts of time and different amounts of commitment that they can provide to a project, that things are going to progress at different speeds, things are going to get prioritized and deprioritized very quickly, depending on who can be there at that time. Sometimes the floor will be on fire, not really on fire, not actual talking about fire. But you do have to recognize that in open source, I'm sure we've all experienced it, no matter where the funding is coming from, there's going to be a situation where you have motivations that you are walking in with that aren't always it's not always the right time for those motivations. So you have to keep that in mind. Back here, we all have goals around open source, right? I'm gonna do this real quick. Aha, yeah, okay. We all have goals. We all have things that we want to provide. We all are going to walk into every situation with an idea about how good or not good the project that you're working on is. Where that funding comes from is part of what you need to consider about what you're investing in, because your time is your investment. The one thing that I can always give you, that it comes from a good friend of mine, and I think that he got it from somewhere else, but it's always follow the money. If you are concerned at all, it's fairly easy to look at who's sponsoring and then figure out, like, just think about why they might be investing, if they're there for whatever reason, right? And in almost every project, there's somebody that you can go to and say, how much money are they giving you and why? And at Almalix, I'm that person. Like, I could talk to you about why each of our sponsors are there, right? There's always somebody you can talk to about funding and why they're there. And it gets to help you weigh projects against each other and where you put your time. I was going to go into a whole bunch more, but here's my 20 minutes. So what questions do we have? Go ahead.
So we talk about the money, following the money. So I work for a company, and one of our products, we use an open source project, right? And the team that is working on this project is relatively small, and there's a feature that we need to be implemented in this open source project. And so the debate was like, do we implement it and upstream it, but we don't have the people to do it? But what we do have is money. And so we paid this project to build this feature for us, right?
Yeah.
Which I think is still a good way to support an open source project. But I did wonder, is that unfair to the rest of the community who is contributing and trying to steer the direction of the project? And then, like, is us showing up with money and saying we really want this feature for something that we're building? Is that unfair to the rest of the community in some way? And is that unfairness balanced out by the value we're giving to that organization in the form of money to support the project?
That's a really good question, because to repeat for the people that are not in the room, the question is, if I, as a company, walk into an open source project with a feature that I need and want to pay the project to build that feature, am I unfairly tipping the scales in my favor because I have money to give to it, and I'm obviously leading the community at that point? My opinion is, it depends on the situation, right? The projects that have let's say a relatively small amount of people actively contributing will welcome that kind of investment, because ultimately, if you're going to get invested like that, then you're going to be able to, over a longer term, you're going to bring more people into the project. Absolutely. If there is a situation where there are bunches of people contributing to the project and the community is actively against what you're asking for or avoiding it for some reason, say you want to add tracking to some kind of software or something, like you want to start harvesting data, like that's the kind of stuff that would get very sketchy to me. If you walk in with good faith and are open about it, then I think that that's okay. One of the best ways to approach that, if anybody else ends up in that situation, would be to, whatever way the project takes feature requests, put in a feature request in a very public way and say, this is what we want to do. Can we pay you to do it? And the community will respond. Like, there is no shortage of opinions on the internet. We'll make it happen, right? Does that answer your question?
Yeah, totally.
Cool.
And that is how we came to be sponsoring the project. Is we showed up in their community Discord channels, like, hey, we take the project, but like, here's a feature that like we really need, you know, and then there was a discussion.
Yeah, that's the exact right way to do it. That's why I said very intentionally, money is not the problem. It is it is one thing that you have to weigh in everything else that's going on. Who else has questions? Go ahead.
Actually, kind of right on that.
Yeah.
Does open source have like a Patreon kind of model that, you know, all the creatives on YouTube and TikTok do?
There are some organizations that have some things like it. There's a Open Collective that allows you, if they're there, then you can donate there. GitHub sponsors exists. There's also this place that I just read about today, I guess. It's called, I think it's thanks.dev or something like that. They're attempting to make it so that like you give them access to your GitHub repo and then they go through your tree, find all of the dependencies, and you give them your budget and they say this is where you should give all of your money. Like if you have, say I have $5,000, it'll go through your tree and say these are the projects that should get your money and this is how much they should get. And like that's how they're evaluating that is a whole other conversation, but it's certainly, there are definitely ways that you can give money to them in a more regular basis. Open Collective is my favorite because then you can also give it to like organizations. If you don't know, Open Collective allows people to join their organization and kind of be sheltered as a nonprofit without having to go through the process of filing as a nonprofit. It's a really cool thing. I love it. Who else has questions? I answered all of your questions. I'm the best ever. In 20 minutes? This is the best. Thank you, everyone. We'll call it. Oh, and we've got 5 minutes so the next person can set up. This is perfect.
and today I'm talking about open source projects and legal issues around. So most of the things which I'm going to talk about, you might have looked at it in some way or the other. Sometimes you may not have given attention to the whole issue, but let's look at it, from a different perspective and see what are the risks when open source projects generally face, and how you can mitigate those risks, and what are the community way of looking at the risk and the issues which we face in the open source projects, and what are the global best practices when we look at some of the risks and some of the legal issues, and how we can avoid all those issues. So when we talk about the legal issues, so first of all, let me say this is not a legal advice. This is an educational effort. It's not, because the laws across the globe is different. The copyright law in US and India or Singapore might differ. So it is not a legal advice. But what I'll be trying to make the attempt is to talk about the best practices globally. So let's look at copyright issues, trademark issues, and patent issues. So as you have seen, most of these things you would have noticed, might not have paid attention to, but so let's start from copyright. So what is a copyright? Basically, generally for software, the protection is generally, in most of the jurisdictions, is through copyright. So is an exclusive legal right to control the rules for copying, modifying, and distributing a work. And who could be a copyright owner? You could be an individual, you could be an association, you could be a foundation, a trust, any of them. And typically you would have seen, this is an example of a copyright notice. Copyright @C, and the year you have done that, you are a foundation, you should put your foundation's name. If you are an individual, you should put your individual's name. If you are a company, you should put your company's name. So that gives an idea to somebody who is looking at that piece of code or library or whatever you have done, that, okay, this has been done by this gentleman or this foundation or this individual, and all the rights for modification, for distribution, you should check with him. And under what license, that we will talk about later. So this is the indication which gives you, like, okay, this is the person or the foundation or the trust I should talk to for anything I have to do with. And typically, like in India, the copyright right extends to 60 years. The lifetime of the author plus 60 years. It varies in different jurisdictions. But broadly, it is a long drawn protection. So when we look at open source projects, irrespective of the you would find that there is a copyright notice. So that provides the information of the rights of the owner and users. So you might be the owner, you might be a user, your rights differ. And what are the rights typically would be understood from the copyright notice. So copyright notice and then the license information. So these are the two most important legal information which I looking for in any open source project. If it is not there, then there is something, an issue there. Because the downstream users will not be able to understand what are his rights. So there are good chances that he or she may not be using your project at all, because most of this information is lacking. So you would have also looked at, different projects have different ways of protecting the copyright. So the contributors license agreement is one way of protecting your, copyright information, and the developer's certificate of origin is another important legal agreement, which protects the rights. Now let's move on to the trademark issues. So what is a trademark? The trademark is, so let's say, when we say foundation, there's an origin of this name. So whether it's goods or services, there is a trademark. So, and there is an inferred source, origin, and quality. let's say when we say Apache Foundation, there is a quality, we know there is a community working behind it. So what this helps in is to create confusion. So later in the session, I'll be talking about in what all instances we have seen confusion. So the trademark owners have the obligation to protect their mark. It's not the users. Users have to comply with the trademark obligation. So open source projects needs to have trademark and also a trademark policy. So the way you write, let's say Apache Foundation, the way the trademark policy will tell you the way Apache Foundation has to be written and who can use it, in what instances. So as I told you, it avoids confusion, it gives you a source of origin, quality, and all those things about trademark. So this is one important thing for every open source project, irrespective of the region you are in. So one example, good example, was the Debian and the Mozilla Foundation issues around the Firefox trademark issue, which started in 2006 and ended in February 2016. So for 10 years, this issue was going on. So it's always better when you are starting a new project, please make sure that you have a proper trademark assigned and you have a trademark policy. So everybody who's using that project knows that this is the way this has to be done. That should be illustrated in your website, in your trademark policy. The other famous instance was when Amazon was sued by Elasticsearch. So there's so many instances across the globe where companies, projects had issues. So please safeguard your trademark and have a trademark policy. And the best projects across the globe has good trademark and trademark policy. And please search that such names are not used already. The other example is the Java trademark, which is owned by Oracle, but Eclipse Foundation used to use it for a long time. There was a lot of conversation around this, and finally they had to give up. So, unable to convince the Oracle to allow the users of trademark term Java to refer to the open source version of Java Enterprise Edition, the Eclipse Foundation is asking those who care about such things to vote on the resource. So, it's a nice situation. After using that name, it's like if somebody tells me you can't use the name Biju after 50 years of my existence in this world, so it is quite difficult. So, and there is a lot of cost. If somebody has to change the project name, there is a lot of confusion it creates. So it's better at the start of the project itself to think about the project name, trademark, copyright, and all these issues. Don't put it to a later instance where there's a lot of cost, there's a lot of inconvenience, there is a lot of confusion. So it is the interest of the trademark holder. So let's say I have got a trademark for my project, open source project. It is my obligation, my interest to safeguard that. So if somebody is misusing my trademark, I should enforce my trademark against them and stop, should not allow them to use that trademark, because they are deriving, so there will be confusion. People will think that, okay, this is done by Apache Foundation. Let's say if Apache Foundation doesn't enforce their trademark, then people would think that, okay, this originated from Apache Foundation project. And there could be sometimes cyber security incidents or threats or malwares in those projects. Because when I use those projects, I thought that it is from Apache Foundation, but it may not be. So it's very important that you protect, if you're a trademark owner, you are the foundation, you're the trust, you should protect and enforce your trademark. Now let's look into the patents aspect. So if you see the preamble of GPL, it states, finally, any program is threatened constantly by software patents. We wish to avoid the danger that redistributors of a free program will individually obtain patent license, in effect, making the program proprietary. To prevent this, we made it clear that any patent must be licensed Now let's look into Apache 2.0. Okay. Clause 6. Grant of patent license. Subject to the terms and conditions of this license, each contributor hereby grants to you a perpetual worldwide, non-exclusive, no charge, royalty-free, irrevocable, except as stated in this section, patent license to make, have made, use, offer to sell, import, and otherwise transfer the work, where such license applies only to those patent claims licensable by such contributor that necessarily infringed by the contributors alone or by combination of their contribution with the work to which such contribution was submitted. So basically, the whole free software community doesn't believe in software patents, most of them. But that doesn't stop the patent trolls or operating entities. So the whole open source projects has been threatened at various instances by two types of entities, other than operating entity. When I say the word operating entities are entities which have products and services. And then there is another type of entity which is called non-practicing entities. Non-practicing entities are entities which just buy patents and they don't have any products or services. Then they start asserting against various entities across the globe. So in the recent past, Genome Foundation was sued. So, and one of the main reasons why open source foundations are a good target for patent trolls are for fundamental reasons that globally these projects are used. And when in a typical scenario, in a corporate scenario, when one entity is sued, they have a patent portfolio which they can retaliate using that. But in an open source foundation, because open source foundations don't file for patents generally, they don't have the defensive capacity. So it is very important that open source foundations think of defensive strategies because they don't have patents and they don't file for patents. So they can't have an offensive strategy. So the only way they can look at it is having a defensive strategy. How as a community we can come together and protect the community. So in 2019, Genome Foundation was sued by a patent troll called as Rothschild. So when Genome Foundation was sued, they joined the community, that is Open Invention Network community. What we did was, we gave them prior art. Using that prior art, they went for crowdfunding. Because patent litigation and defense is a very costly affair. So what did they then went for invalidation of this patent of Rothschild, which is what this is what Rothschild alleged that Genome Foundation infringed, and that's the patent number. And once the invalidation proceedings started against Rothschild, Rothschild withdrew the case, gave license to all the patents which they had. And this is a statement post this from Rothschild. Are pleased to announce that the patent dispute between Rothschild Patent Imaging and Genome have been settled. I'm pleased that they managed to settle this issue amicably. I've always supported innovation of open source software and its developers and encouraged its innovation and adoption. So, in the first instance, they sued an open source foundation. And later on, they made this statement. And the best part, what happened after this was, after the settlement, using the prior art which Open Invention Network gave, somebody went and invalidated the patent of Rothschild. So that is the final conclusion this happened. So it is very important that the community comes together, have a defensive strategy. So one of the biggest community in the defensive strategy is Open Invention Network. I'll put a disclaimer here. I'm part of Open Invention Network. I represent the India region. So what we do at Open Invention Network is, it's the largest community in the world. Anybody can join. You are a project, you are a startup, you are a company, you are an individual developer. Anybody can join the community. This was initiated 16 years back. And today we have companies, startups, and projects. Even Linux Foundation is part of the project community. Anybody can join. They join through an e-license. The only obligation you have is that in case you have a language platform patents, you will not assert it against any other community member. And the other community members also have the same reciprocal pledge. And wherever you are in the world, you can be part of the community. There is no commercials to join the community. And so we have a cross license of 2 million total patents. So this ranges from 3,885 softwares and applications. And some of the protections we provide. So you can see the community members who are part of OIN, open source projects globally.
Not Rothschild.
Yeah?
Not Rothschild.
Not Rothschild. They will be happy to now join us. They'll now join us. So the only people who don't join OIN is people who have an intent to be a patent troll, who want to assert. So if you see from the composition of the 3,885 softwares and applications, it looks something like this. So almost all areas of technology is covered, open source technology is covered. So at various times in the past, it was operating entities which behave like patent trolls. In recent times, it is not just operating entities, it is non-practicing entities which are creating havoc in the whole ecosystem. So there are various other entities which work on the defensive strategies. So Open Invention Network is the largest among them. So now let's move on to the other issue, is open source compliance. So this has various problems because in the whole supply chain of software, how do you ensure open source compliance? Let's say you have vendors across the globe, or you have contributors across the globe. How do you ensure that each of them are following the same set of rules and ensuring that the level of education compliance is the same? So there is a Linux Foundation project called as OpenChain. OpenChain, the objective of OpenChain is to ensure that in the whole supply chain of software development, there should be compliance. Let's take a scenario where you have contribution, people contributing from across the globe. How do we put a standard that, okay, this is the benchmark you should do? Because my understanding might be different. My friend's understanding who is contributing from a different region in the world might be different. How do we have the basic, common platform? So that is taken care by OpenChain. So OpenChain 2.1 specification has now become the ISO standard. So you can do a self-certification. You can get a third-party certification. And in fact, there is a security specification which is going to come up. And so all those issues related to license security around open source compliance, because typically, globally, this is one of the biggest problems, like open source compliance. That's the objective of this community. And we have seen that most of the companies globally are gearing and adopting OpenChain as the standard, whether you are in telecom, whether irrespective of the sector you are in. And that helps to mitigate. And the contribution is not just from one region in the world. The good part is that companies, individuals across the globe, across various domains, are contributing to this project. And as we all know, that the documentation, license compliance, these are the issues which most of the companies' projects face. So OpenChain would be a good answer to all those problems and solutions. Provides great solutions. And I would be happy if you could look into OpenChain 2.1 or the specifications there. And I'm also looking forward for the security specification. And you would have seen globally there is a lot of security challenge which OpenSpace has faced in the last 10 years. which also has in certain cases affected the credibility, in certain cases. So communities like OpenChain would be a great bet. Compliance. So I have only 5 minutes more. I think if you guys have any questions.
What's your thoughts on banning software patents? Like 10 years ago in New Zealand, it banned.
Yeah. So if you see globally, in US there is this Alice judgment, but what happens to the existing patents which has already been granted, software patents which has been granted, and sometimes it's very difficult to decipher between the software patents and if it is not just a software patent, because the patent authority there in each region has different standards. So in US, post the Alice judgment, software patents are not allowed. But there has been various instances where software patents has been allowed. So in Europe, software per se is not allowed. Patent per se is not allowed. But if it is in furtherance of that hardware, so that differentiation is very difficult. So somebody has to scrutinize each software application, patent application. And the rules of the game is different in different parts of the world. So maybe in New Zealand, they have stopped software patents. Even in India, software per se cannot be patented. But we have a CRI guidelines, computer-related invention guidelines. So if you can pass that guidelines, you get a patent. So the rules of the game is different. So I don't think in the near future we will see software not being granted patents. Yeah.
So with all the things like Copilot, those are AI-based. Some of the programmers are contributing using this kind of AI technologies. The potential like issues the like trading.
Yeah, I think OpenChain has not looked into. What OpenChain does today is prescribes you the best standard. So, for example, if you are a company or a project, you should have an open source policy. So, which also includes that you train your team that what is the best practices. You review, conform to the license requirements. Train them, make them understand, because see, generally license information obligations are left out by people. So whether there is a copyright notice, there is a modification notice, all those things has to be looked into, and then only you can be conformant with OpenChain. So there is 1.1 specification, 1.1, 1.1, 2, and 2.1. So only if you are conformant with 2.1, that's equivalent to an ISO standard. So training, compliance, audit, review. So all these processes at least makes some level of compliance. So whether it is OpenChatGPT or anything, these rules of the game are same. So training, compliance, and enforcement.
So it doesn't matter if they use these kind of tools as part of the application of the.
So the rules of the games are same. License compliance is required. Yeah. I think
How do we get the buy-in? How do we justify the impact? Because we can't just bring them the numbers and say, well, these are the people that are going to use this with this technology, especially if it's a new product.
Right.
And how are we going to convince them that this is not enough to fill? Thank you.
Yeah, so one of the things that I feel when the business part of it comes is where the standards and the laws really help, because that's when you are forced to do it. So that always helps, that you have to comply with it at one point, why not do it from the beginning. But then again, I feel like a progressive enhancement is a good approach to shape, because then you are like, see, we are not wasting a separate time. This is how we are supposed to build. So it's not like I have made a product and now I need to spend some little bit more time to make it accessible. No, this is how we are making the product. We are making it with the progressive enhancement way. So this is what it is. This is how much time it takes. This is what you have to do. That's probably how you should approach. And you should also show that accessibility really helps everyone. Like it also helps in their SEO business. So if you're like, forget everything, at least your SEO will be better. But also you can show them that, see, you might be thinking that our user base doesn't have anyone who is using screen reader, but also think that why there is no user who doesn't have screen reader, because probably it's not accessible using screen reader. So there's an entire market that you're not even targeting because they are not supporting screen reader users.
As someone who is building websites and blogs with Jekyll, right now using a tool called Quato, so I'm not always interacting with HTML kind of stuff. So how can I start thinking about making my sites accessible?
Right. So if you are making using some static site generators, basically like Jekyll or whatever you are using, probably the first is if you are using a theme, then it's good idea to search for an accessible theme. Now, if that's not supported, that's really sad, which is where now you have to involve a developer can make an accessible theme, because all the static site generators still have a table, right, which shows the content in there. So you need to either override the theme that you are using, like use the CSS probably, but write the HTML yourself, so that it already becomes a much better structured thing, and then it can be more accessible.
One more. Thank you. Just one thing to add on. As a designer myself, I think there's also one thing we also need to think about when you design an app or a website is there are users who actually using different device sizes. There are users who are using different phone sizes. Like my dad, he actually have to scale all the phones really big to read.
Exactly, that's what the Zoom thing was.
So do you think that is also part of accessibility design? Or is it supposed to be just a fundamental issue of any website, any app?
So yeah, everything should be accessibility. I would go as far as saying localization should also be part of accessibility, right? There can be different languages that if your website just breaks when your language like switch to a different language, or even when you translate it with Google, again those things all come to HTML. The HTML tag itself has a lang attribute which almost no one uses. So it's very important to do those kind of things. Even like for a country like India, there are many rural areas that are still dependent on 2G internet network. Progressive enhancement is there because your JavaScript might not be loading, but the HTML is already usable. So you can just cross. So yes, accessibility includes all different kinds of users. It's the idea is to make it inclusive. I heard a talk today before. It's if it's not inclusive, is it really open? And I really love that. Like, so yes, inclusive.
That's interesting. I love it. Thank you very much. I'm going to have 4 minutes. The next one.
Oh, yeah.
Welcome back. Next up, we have Lim Sui Young, who's a senior DevOps engineer at GovTech. He'll be talking to us about leveraging open source technologies for testing website accessibility. Thank you.
Thank you. Right. Glad to be here. And today I'll be talking about open source accessibility testing with the tool that my team at GovTech is building called Purple Hats. So before I do that, let me just give a short introduction about myself. Can you guys hear me?
We need it for the stream.
Okay.
Okay, I guess you might.
We are reminded that for accessibility reasons,
Yes, you should be making a microphone, right? Right. So a bit about myself. As introduced, I'm a senior DevOps engineer at GovTech. Myself, I've been working with computers since I was in primary school, and I have a visual impairment. And one of the reasons why I'm working on accessibility is so that I hope that our services that we build can be more inclusive and accessible. Oh, right. Okay. That always happens, right? Okay. So my favorite topics include DevOps, DevSecOps, and quality engineering, as well as recently accessibility testing. Yep. And on non-tech topics, I do talk about inclusive employment, especially employability of persons with disabilities. So actually, the last speaker probably talked about accessibility testing, but regardless. So why accessibility testing, right? Firstly, accessibility testing, as the previous speaker mentioned, and as you know, it's about making testing to ensure that your websites and mobile apps are friendly towards PWDs. And one form of accessibility testing is this thing called automated accessibility testing. Automated accessibility testing aims to help, it's a kind of software testing to help you uncover and ensure that applications that develop are accessible to PWDs. And for common types of disabilities include color blindness and those who are vision impaired. So probably heard, right? Vision impaired users, they use things such as a screen reader as well as a keyboard. And these PWDs use these assistive tech tools, not just to access the web and to use their mobile apps. And these services today that we roll out, chances are they're not. If you don't test for these people, they are not accessible. And what my team and I are working on is to create accessibility testing tool called Purple Hats that aims to help you, crawl through at least the entire website very quickly, right? You have 5 minutes of your time, install Purple Hats, try it out, crawl the entire website, or even better yet, right? If you want to make sure your websites, especially like news websites, info sites, are continuously tested, you can use accessibility testing as well in the CI/CD. And some of the benefits, well, automated testing actually helps you to make it, make part of your functional requirements if it's not already so. And today, you can use automated accessibility testing to help catch accessibility testing issues early with that. And of course, you can categorize accessibility testing issues, such as color contrast issues, things such as improper headings or lack of headings, and you can catch all these recurring issues and categorize them. And what we support is the console app, as well as in Docker for those who run it in, say, your GitHub, your GitLab. And we're actually trying to shift a bit more towards the user side, the designers, and everyday users, so we're developing a desktop version of it as well. So, so much about what this tool can do, but how can Purple Hats really help, right? They're just a tool. So I give you this scenario. When a person who is working on your app is not able to understand things such as your shopping cart. The shopping cart reads as a button, or your checkout screen is not intelligible to the screen reader, it doesn't read out what exactly your line items are correctly, then what happens to that? Well, Purple Hats can then scan, at least if you have done proper accessibility testing with Purple Hats, you could find that actually some of these code issues are already flagged out, like the button should have been labeled properly, or your text should have proper headings. And you can actually pick up some of these issues, and hopefully, with the tool, you can actually categorize them by WCAG. So WCAG is the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines. There's a lot to unpack, so just Google it, and you realize that there's a lot of different standards out there, but WCAG 1 helps you unpack accessibility issues in different categories of issues, and you can find out what exact issue the user might be facing when they interface with your website. And with that, one of the selling points of Purple Hats is you can scan it across pages. I know Google Lighthouse is great, but you can only use it on one page. It is keep scanning, and every time you use or refresh the page, the next screen, Purple Hats can help you do that. And I'll show you how you can do that even for websites that require interactive access, right? Like you need to sign in, for example. And with that, I hope that people will pick it up and then plan it in their, with all the issues flagged out, you can plan it in accessibility roadmap. So the tech stack is actually purely open source. We use various methods of crawling as well as Playwright to help automate the workflow of scanning for accessibility. Crawling is used for crawling, and Playwright is used for automating or writing your tests, right? If you are a functional tester, you know, or quality engineer, you know that you can write quickly record tests, and we're using the same tools out there. And for the reporting side, which is the accessibility scan and the report, we use Xcore. And Mustache is a report HTML that we use to help us generate that report. And for the code environment, you can run it across this, you're running on Node, and you can run it on GitHub as well as Docker. Some of the features, as briefly alluded, you can crawl a website for accessibility issues. You can then scan the pages either as a website, you enter a URL, or you can provide a sitemap. So if you're a news website, you got thousands of articles, you just throw in the sitemap, perhaps will help you scan through all of that. And lastly, the fun part, right? You can record your own flows with our custom flow feature. All of that will be reported through using Xcore and up to W3C, WCAG guidelines. So I'll give you an example of the console app. All you do is just, once you installed it, you just run any node application, just node index. We give you a series of prompts for the user to understand what they want to do and do a crawl, and then type in your URL, and you can scan whether you want to scan in desktop or mobile, and very quickly you start scanning your website. You can scan about 100 pages in less than a minute, depending on your the type of laptop or computer you're using. Then you get a very brief report, like what is the accessibility, what kind of accessibility issues are there, and we categorize it according to the Xcore engine, like whether it's critical, serious, moderate, etc. And then you can download a report. The report looks like this. It tells you the website, again, how many issues are there, or unique issues, and exactly the HTML and the issue tagged to the HTML element. So it looks like that. If I zoom in, it gives you the impact rating, the WCAG clause, as well as the description of the issue, and then the page URL. You can click on the page, and it'll bring you back to where you were to find out where that issue is, as well as the HTML elements, so you can do your highlight and inspect element. If you need more help, you can just click on the shortcut there, and it will bring you to a help guide by DQ University that lists out very comprehensively what the issue is about, how you can approach it, how you may fix it. So for the people who are developing things like e-commerce sites, things that are behind a login screen, you can use our custom flow feature that allows you to scan a website by recording a series of actions. So this will allow you to scan websites where there are no, in certain cases where you need to fill in a form first, you need to submit. Then for some pages also, there's for new websites today, there's this thing called single page architecture, where the URL doesn't change. So Purple Hat can also handle that because we use image-based scanning to determine whether there's a lot of HTML elements change on the screen. So same thing, you go to our console, you select custom, you choose the format of the scan. In this case, still doing a desktop scan, choose the website that I want to scan, and very quick, in a few moments time, you open a browser. It's not ordinary browser, this is actually by Playwright that we use, where you can notice you can highlight over elements, and every time you interact with an element, be it a mouse click or keyboard type, it will record that series of steps. So say here, I'm just searching for accessibility on GovTech's website. Click on hyperlink, and here's the flow that I want to scan, right? So that I went through different pages. I actually went through my form element. Notice that I have to click the search button before a form element appeared. So that indicates there's new elements on the page. And then what happens is Overheads will then run the scan and repeat that series of actions for you. And as he does, he's actually scanning the entire page, the DOM element for accessibility issues. Right. And then you have the same format of the report as you saw earlier. So how can you start? Well, it's a simple node application. You can go to our repository, just search Purple Hats, probably one of the search, top page one on Google search. You can also scan this QR code for a quick installation guide. So one of the challenges for non-tech people is, how do I install, people don't understand what is Node, what is this package management tools. So we have packaged a zip file that you can literally just download and double click a command or shell script file, and you will load the entire shell for you, so you can run the command line with everything installed for you. And of course, lastly, for those people who work in the software development team, they want to bring their test scripts that you just recorded, or you want to bring the crawler into your dev environment, your testing environment. How can you do that? So we have, as I mentioned, we support Docker. So we have a pre-built, or rather, we have a Docker file which you can use to build an image, and then you can just deploy it either in your favorite GitHub or GitLab with the same command line interface. Right, so that's about the tool that we are working on. If you have any questions, I'll be around for much time left for Q&A. And if you'd like to find out more about the work we do, or Purple Hats, scan the left QR code for the Purple Hats page on our GovTech developer portal. And on the right, you can link up with me on LinkedIn. Thank you.
Before we go to questions, okay. Question?
Yes. I'm wondering if the repo is open for submitting pull requests, if there's anything that can contribute.
Yes, you are open to. Yeah, we'll take a look at the PR and see what makes sense. And, yeah, you can check that.
I've got a question. Just curious, does this make, you said you can, when you want to test, you can have it test as if you're looking on a mobile device?
Yes.
So does that mean a PWA site will be exactly that scenario, right? So you simulate a PWA site as well?
Exactly. So if there's time, I can show it on the screen. Do I have to adjust the screen sharing so that the audience can see what's on screen?
I would not bother.
Okay, all right. All right, okay, great. So I'll just put the mic down here. So say you have a PWA app, right? You have a URL to that page. You can expose an endpoint for it. Then you can actually just enter the same thing. And here you can choose mobile. Yeah. And if you use the CLI, you can actually choose a lot more options, like down to the viewport you want to test for, the user agent that you want to test for. I'll just give, again, the same website. There you go. So this is actually running against a iPhone 11 user agent with, yeah, and your app will pick out that user agent and render it accordingly.
So I guess you can change user agents then.
Yes, you can. So we have the entire list of user agents presented on the repo page. Yeah, so you can choose from there as well. Yeah. Yeah, so this, like as illustration, this is exactly how fast the problem works.
Missing our next speaker. Was there one more? All right, well, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Bear in mind, you need to be off on 10 minutes of the hour.
Yeah, I have a timer, so I have a very sharp time control. Okay.
Bear in mind, you don't have 15 minutes.
Yeah, I know.
You put 15 minutes on your timer.
Yeah, 15 minutes.
So I'm saying you don't have 15 minutes. You will not.
Hey, welcome back. Ted Liu is now going to give us the answer for question and answer slides. 13 minutes of Q&A. Please go ahead.
How much time do I have?
1-3.
1-5, right?
1-3.
1-3. 13. Oh.
Okay. Hi, everyone. Good afternoon. Today I will present actually it's a developing answer. It's not final answer. And I need you guys to participate and contribute and give us feedback. Okay. Yeah, let me briefly introduce myself. And who was in the event hall stage earlier? At 3 o'clock? No, okay. Anyway, whoever answered that, you get a souvenir from me. Okay. That's briefly introduce myself. I currently running 3 position and 3 hats. Called a hat trick, and it one in Kaiyuan, which is a ground up grassroots open source alliance in China. So all volunteer nonprofit virtual organization. I don't think I asked a few people then in South Asia or Singapore, and who can tell me though, is there any similar ground up open source association alliance in Singapore?
When you say ground up, what does ground up mean? I mean, everybody, there are ground and societies, hacker spaces, and so there are quite a few. Yeah.
Okay. Right, and I need to get connected. Yeah, and the other one is Apache Software Foundation. Yeah, actually, it was here. I was the former member and also the incubator member and mentor. Also the community development PMC member. And also I'm the open source rainforest advisor in China. And is backed up by some enterprises and the government association. So I'll introduce that a little bit later. So previously I was with these companies, right, and Computer Associates, and when I was in the States, and all the green one, including the red one, actually all involved open source or Linux business. The red one, Turbo Linux, I joined in 2000, and that was when the .com bubble burst, right? I have like 500,000 shares and still put on my wall. Right? It's very nice.
Very nice on the wall.
Yeah, right. Never get listed. So I went into 2 startups, all failed. So I decided, maybe I should try community. But the company I joined, whichever I joined, the industry rank move up after I joined the Y. So you can see my destiny, right? Okay, so my 3-party experiences. Born and educated in Taiwan and studied abroad in the States. And I worked there for several years and went to China for 22 years in Beijing. and I moved back to Taiwan for last 3 years because of COVID-19. So my three-body experiences. I would not say too much, but who read the three-body problem? Okay, 1, 2, 3. Okay. There's a fan here. Shared. Wait a second. There's actually, I have some pin and very nice stuff I can share later. Okay, so everybody can contact me and through my contact information. Now today, I want to share this. There's a YouTuber who is very famous with 60,000 fans. Yeah, this is one. Played it for a few seconds. Oh wait, there's another one. Oh, here we go. And this guy is quite famous. You know, he's evangelist.
One of the issues that I have as a YouTube creator, and besides YouTube and being a creator, is support on the videos that I make. I want to.
Right, I'll skip this. But you can find this guy.
A lot of times I look at the video and people have questions about, well, how do
And 33 minutes video, and it's a very tutorial. And you watch this and learn how to
and it just turns into a mess trying to answer.
deploy the answer on Docker quickly. So check this out, right? This guy, DB tag. Okay. Okay. Now, the answer is developed by one of the largest developer community in China. They have more than a couple million developer subscribers. Yeah, but they're not the largest one. They're one of the largest one. Anyway, they are very focused on open source technology. So recently they are acquired by a DevOps tools company called ONES, ONES. So because they encountered or engage with many developers, that each project they have the same problem: how to help user, how to help developer to understand to solve problem and questions. So starting last October, they actually early last year they developed that answer solution and launched it. So there's one key feature. It's a Q&A platform, and they help members with questions and boost community participation. The expert, many experienced people would love to help to contribute, verify, upload correct information. Right? And that's the first one, the Q&A platform. Secondly, it's very well organized. They're very easy to use and use tags to organize questions and help content into categories. And now it's easy to find for others. And you can search easily. The third one is integration. You configure then your community with plugins and your various services, and improve your workflow and grow your community. So the last one, but then not least one, you use a gamification approach, also make it fun and easy to use. I call that keep it simple but smart. Still KISS, right? Okay, so this is one example. And many people fork their project and use it for their own Q&A for their project. This is one Chinese users. They fork it or they install it on their site, and without even the answer team knows it. But they actively participate in the development. Then the answer team knows, oh, we have this user, they have provide valid feedback to the project, and they after that they become part of the contribution team. Right? And so since they launched that October 24th, 1024, right? It's meaningful to many Chinese people. It's called Developer Day in China. Right? So they launched the service on October 24th last year, that's October, and they got a lot of attention and stars and people, the users. Right? And this is how that they localized or internationalized their product into 15 languages. Yeah. And the percentage here shows that the percentage is being localized. So, for example, Chinese, of course, 99%, but the answer that project is English size from day one, but it also translates in multiple languages. So you can see the internationalization progress here. Okay, so they've been used since even though it's an English project, it's still mostly used in China, and followed by the States and other regions. I hope after this conference that more South Asian people and project community can use it actively. Okay, you can check its web answer.gap on GitHub and check the release that we release frequent and quickly for a very short period of time. And this is the roadmap. Okay, so you can see they receive the feedback from the users and then incorporate it into their roadmap. We've been asked quite frequently lately that the plugin support for ChatGPT. Everybody talks about that, right? But I believe, my personal belief, that the ChatGPT will not replace the people interaction. Right? When you ask a top guru answer something that, and some novice user, they ask simple question. You probably cannot be a cookie cutter that everybody give the same answer like ChatGPT does. So I think this is really helpful for this Q&A community. ChatGPT plugin will be included soon. Right. So this is actually my last slide. Yeah, it's a quick video to show how easy it is to be installed and used. People sitting back, probably cannot see it, but please bear with me.
You're pretty much out of time anyway. We've got a minute. 5 minutes, including any Q&A.
13, so I have 45 seconds. Choose the language, the database. It's only actually 4 or 5 steps. You get it set up easily, nicely. One more step. We're done. Add question, yeah. Yeah, just go forward with it. Actually, not too many technical questions to ask because it's so simple. And you want to add on any feature, just give feedback and join the contribution. Right? Thank you. Thank you for your time.
Good afternoon. Welcome to the final session of the day. By no means the least, Jan Boyd.
Yeah, hello, I'm Jan from Nextcloud and also from Open Source Design. So with this talk, I'm just combining two of the projects that I'm working on. I also have stickers later if you want to get some. Yeah. Gotta keep the sticker economy going. So in this talk, I'm gonna show you 5 strategies, by no means all, yeah, but 5 strategies that we're applying at Nextcloud for open source design. So first, if you don't can I have a show of hands who knows what Nextcloud is? Okay, so most people, but I will explain it, of course. So Nextcloud essentially is a full suite of tools for keeping your data private within your organization or your personal data. So we have file sync and sharing, we have calendars, contacts, video calls and chat, all sorts of things. We have an Office suite, which is based on Collabora or LibreOffice Online. And we also have a bunch of AI integration, which is on-premise. So you get the benefit of AI, but on your own server. And it's kind of cool. So, if you want to connect, that's my website. All the info is there. But yeah, let me show you actually what you came here for. So, first strategy is structure. This is essentially like sort of like the least you can do, or where you can start kind of category. Yeah, if you are an engineer, a developer, or someone who has a project, or if you're not a developer, if you're someone within an open source project, then the basic thing you can do is give visibility to design, and also to ensure that there is a place for designers that they have when they come, that they know where to continue or what to do. And I will show you some examples. So one thing that we do, or one of the first things that we do, and what I always recommend to projects, is that you have an issue tag called design. Yeah? And I mean, some projects call it UX/UI or whatever. Some people have different tags. I just keep it simple. Yeah, or we just keep it simple in our projects. Just call it design. Yeah. So just one design tag. It's across the repositories, and that's where you find the design issues. That's where we open the issues. That's where other designers can find the issues, and that's where you can get started. Also, for example, you can of course combine it with different other issue tags like good first issue that you might be aware of, that which is an issue tag that can be used for people who are just getting started. So if you combine design and good first issue, you get good design and first issues. So that's pretty cool. And that is a really simple thing you can do in your project. So if you don't do that right now, do it. Yeah, first thing to do. It's gonna get harder, yeah, but this is the simplest one. So next one is grouping designers, and this can be done in any sort of way. Yeah? This is one way we're doing. As I said, Nextcloud is this whole suite of applications. One thing that we have is Nextcloud Talk. This is our chat and call and video call software. And here we have a conversation called Design Team Public on our own instance. This one, as it says, it's public. You can also join. You can go there from nextcloud.com/design. And this is a place where we group designers, where you can join as a designer, where also a lot of developers hang out. Yeah? So people exchange information and just talk about design. Yeah? It's sort of, you don't have to be a designer to be in this group. Yeah? And there's of course other places as well where you can group designers, like on GitHub or on the whichever issue tracking system you use. You can have these groups like we have @Nextcloud/designers. You know? So you can mention an entire group. For review, for example, you can request a review from the designers. So grouping people, giving them sort of a place to chat, and not only among themselves, but also with others, with the engineers. As Saptak, for example, previously in his talk said, it's very important that design is not just a handover process, but it's an iterative process, especially in open source where there's traditionally very few designers. It has to be very collaborative. Then the third example for this section is the last example. It's have specific pages. So this is our design page. It's nextcloud.com/design. It's not the whole page, of course. There's more here, with a whole bunch of text and info. A lot of what I'm talking about now, which serves as sort of an entry point, and then a more advanced thing. And this is probably a bit more difficult if you don't have it yet. But is having design guidelines of some sort, having components, having just saying, hey, this is the brand guidelines, this is our logo, these are our colors, this is what we use. Wording guidelines is also something that is not very often used. They're like being friendly, or which type of capitalization you use, or which kind of language you use. Like not language as in English or German or whatever, but which kind of type of tone. Are you friendly? Are you serious? And so on. It's also very interesting to have guidance for that. All right, so that's the first one, having a structure. Yeah. The next one is having a process and making that process open. Yeah? So in this section, I will talk about specifications and mockups, how we do that, and how we involve engineers and iterate. Again, coming back to this, that it's a very iterative process and a very collaborative process. And some examples for that. As I said before, we have labels. Here, this design label. There's a whole bunch of other labels. And this is a specification that is done where the developers are on GitHub. Yeah? So this is for an improvement to a sharing design and flow that I wrote. Yeah, you see specification, first a bunch of text. Down here, there's some mockups, and then there's some more text. So it's at a place where developers work. It's in the issue tracker, where we also do the design specification. It's very important because then everyone gets involved, and it's not a fixed thing. Then we're done with the mockups, and then we throw it over the wall. But it's like it's a discussion. Yeah. So specifications as issues. That's a very important one. Next example is maybe you know the software. It's called PenPot. It's basically it's an open source mockup tool. You can also use it actually to create slides. My colleague Nimisha actually does her slides with it. These slides were not done; these were done in LibreOffice, but she does her slides with PenPot, which is very cool. So it's sort of an alternative to Figma or even Miro, these whiteboarding tools. And we use that for mockups. Yeah? And it's very cool, very useful, open source. And I can only really wholeheartedly recommend it. Yeah, we also do that in the open. Yeah? So we invite new people who want to contribute. And we also invite developers. So yeah, because we're 2 full-time designers on the team only, with a lot of engineers. But there's a whole bunch of people in this PenPot organization, and you should be very liberal with inviting people, because then people can do stuff by themselves. Yeah, like developers of groupware, for example, can do mockups, or any developer can mock up their own app, their own feature, and then you can talk with them and do some modifications, and that way you sort of teach design as well, which is a very important thing too. Next example, or no, not next example. So this was the last example for design process. Next strategy is research, and especially in open source, we don't have a lot of resources. We're very, I mean, it's not a very small community, thankfully, right? We're growing, and it's very big, as you can see from the conference. But designers in open source are still fewer. So it's very important to use existing material and to also maximize the limited resources that you have. And by that I mean, you can just get inspired a lot. I mean, as everyone does, as every project does, you look at other projects, you look at what works. A lot of projects, even closed source projects, blog about their usability tests or about their design research. There's a lot to learn that is out there. You don't need to always start from zero. So some examples again. Here for our Nextcloud Talk app, which you see in this column with a lot of nice green check marks, because we have a bunch of cool features that others don't have. We did this gap analysis with other solutions like Microsoft Teams, Zoom, Google Meet, Slack, and Discord. And we also looked at others, of course, but these are the main ones. And we just did a simple overview. And this gives us a feeling of like, where are we missing things, where are we positioned very well, what do we need to look into? Because then we would just look, for example, like the last one, instant disposable meetings. You see there's already an issue created for this. We don't have it, it's an issue. And then we would go to the other solutions, look at how they do it, and simply see if there's like sort of a common thread that we can build on, that we can sort of make it look very similar. Also to pick up people who are switching to an open source solution from a proprietary solution, to make it much simpler. As a next example, there's usability testing. This is of course a bit more of an investment. In this case, this was done with a partner organization, sort of. It's a usability agency or a design agency, open source design agency called Ura Design. And they did usability testing for our Forms app, for our Nextcloud Forms. And this is, I think, is a very cool display of results. So basically, here you see it was done with 5 participants, 1 participant per column, and a bunch of tasks. Here you see the first tasks were rather easy, yeah? And then here, sharing the form was an issue, yeah? So you immediately see this is something you need to fix, yeah? And so it shows you immediately, as someone who is not involved with the project, yeah, where the difficulties are, which is also very important because you as a person who works on the project, you tend to not see the issues. So usability testing is really good tool. And it doesn't have to be with 5 people. Yeah, it can be 3 people. Yeah, 3 people should be the minimum, I would say. But you should do it. Yeah, agencies do it with 12 people. That's like, yeah, you don't need that. But just show it to a few people who are not so technical. Yeah, to a few people who don't know the project, to a few people at the conference, for example, and just see how they use it, and don't help out. And let them make mistakes because it's not their mistakes; it's mistakes of your software. You already see that I could do a whole talk about just usability testing, but let me continue. Next thing is surveys. It's a very quick tool to see also where you stand with your with issues, with features or anything. Of course, this is more of a quantitative approach where you just get you should get a lot of responses. Where usability testing is qualitative, so you get one-on-one feedback. This is a quantitative approach. So you should spread it far and wide, and you always need to be aware of a bias. So if you tweet it from your project account, maybe the people who are replying, they already know your project well, so you need to just keep that in mind. But yeah, you can also do that with Nextcloud Forms. Yeah, we have a Forms app, which is an open source Google Forms, and we periodically do surveys for Nextcloud apps, like about our Kanban board app or about Nextcloud Forms itself, just like here. And this helps a bunch to just see where we stand and what we can improve and what people are expecting. So then, that was that with research. Now we come to the 4th point, community. So some of you, hello. So it's very important to get people excited about design and involve a wider community. Not just, as I said before, not just the designers or the people who would identify themselves as designers, but also the engineers, because everyone sort of can. I mean, you would think almost every engineer has something to say about design if you look at some open source communities. So you should channel it into the right avenues. So let me give you some examples. We have this sprung out of just talking with people at our Nextcloud conference in person and giving them design reviews. We have a regular design review call every week. It's at Tuesday at 2 p.m. or whatever, but it doesn't really matter, except if you want to join, you're very welcome. But we have a weekly regular review call for 1 hour, so it's not that long, it's a short but regular review call for anyone who wants their design reviewed in the community. It can be an app that an employee works on, or a community member, whatever. But we have this open forum sort of, and where also everyone can join. It's whether a designer who studied or whatever, or an engineer or a marketing person or no background whatsoever. It's all cool. Everyone can give feedback on what's off, or if something looks weird or is not understandable. So this is a very, very cool tool. And then we take notes during the calls, and they're then put into issues. And then sort of a checklist. It's directly a checklist for the developer. What is very important is that this needs to come, you need to involve the people, the maintainers of the apps or the developers. They need to come to you. You can't just do this review without them present and then give them the list. This is a recipe for disaster, essentially. So what this is, we're just very open. We ask a lot. We have to ask a lot and again. But when people come, it's usually very helpful for them. And so that's one example. And can really recommend it. If you want to get involved also, come join these calls. Next example, and this is a very current one, because you can actually participate. This is something that we posted about yesterday, because for our current Nextcloud Hub 5 development cycle, we're looking for you to design document templates. Yeah? So we have these, I mean, when you create a new file, create a new document or presentation or calc sheet or drawing document, we have these templates. Yeah. So these are two templates that I actually designed. Yeah. Kept it rather simple because creating templates actually very difficult. Yeah. But maybe you have some cool templates. Maybe you have some nice ideas, and you can submit them. So this is a current community contribution effort. Yeah, you can go to nextcloud.com/blog, and there's a post with more info on that. Would be cool to have your designs submitted, and they will be. It's much like the maybe you know from Ubuntu or from other open source projects. I think this background background what's it called? Background photo submission process. Yeah, for the desktop background. So in this case, it's a document template that will be shipped with Nextcloud. Yeah. So yeah, community involvement, very important. And then like that, you can grow a community and make people, like at the very least, even if they don't join, it's first you have a very cool template, and they can say, hey, I contributed to an open source project in a very visible way, and it's a very cool thing that they can show their friends. And then maybe they get involved. So yeah. Next thing, and this is the last strategy, is collaboration. Because I mean, we're open source, yeah, we're all here. But what I often see, and what I've seen through the years, basically, of working in open source, is that oftentimes the projects are still very insular. Yeah? I mean, oftentimes there's collaboration, but more often than not, it's sort of a very, very, I mean, I don't want to say walled garden, yeah, because that has a certain connotation, but you need to understand that you're not the only project. Yeah? There's a whole bunch of other projects out there that you can do cool collaborations with. And there's, of course, also community developers, which are not necessarily in your direct sphere of influence. So let me show you some examples of that, what we do. So, for example, with Collabora, who you probably know, they do LibreOffice Online and Collabora, we partnered to create Nextcloud Office. This is basically built on Collabora Online, and we work very closely with them. Yeah, we have a call every week to do adjustments and to see where we adjust our strategy and stuff. And it really helps us to integrate very, very, very closely. Yeah, so you have a very nicely integrated Office suite directly inside Nextcloud, and they also get a lot of feedback from our side. And this is really a very cool partnership. Yeah, because we both, yeah, we have a limited amount of designers. But every time we do like this ping pong among us, we get new ideas and everything. It's very cool. So partnerships with other projects, I can really, really recommend. This is the first example. So the next one is community developers. So we have our App Store, Nextcloud App Store. There you see community apps like Forms that I mentioned before, Nextcloud Maps actually, tasks in this case, and Nextcloud News, a newsreader like Google News. That they shut down a few years ago. So these community developers also often come to our design team channel and ask if they can have a design review. You know? And then it's very useful for them because then we do the review, and we have a bunch of other people who are also engineers or developers from other apps. And they say, oh, but in my app it's different, or in my app we do it like that. And that way, even, yeah, it gets like sort of, how do you say, it gets consistent without the designers necessarily always having like their thumbs on it. Yeah? So it creates this exchange between the maintainers of the different apps as well. Yeah, so for example, the different Android apps or the different iOS apps for Nextcloud, they all exchange sort of, or they're like, oh, this is how you do it. Oh yeah, we have this library and so on. So this is very cool, yeah, and creating this flow of information between the teams as well. Then next example, and second to last example, I think, is GNOME online accounts. So you probably know GNOME, yeah, the open source desktop, has this online accounts functionality, which I think is super cool because this is also in Ubuntu actually. Immediately when you install it, when you start it for the first time, you see the screen. And you can add an account. So of course they show Ubuntu single sign-on, and then Google, because it's popular, but then they show Nextcloud. So you can add your Nextcloud account directly when you installed your system. So this has been an effort actually initially started out in the GNOME community, sort of, because they are a very design-driven community. I really thanks to the GNOME community, I have to say, because a lot of these techniques are also inspired by GNOME. And so this, it's already there since a long time, comes through partnership, to talking with them, and we're always trying to link up more apps so that they can be synced, because like that you have a whole experience, just like, I mean, we need to compete against the likes of Apple, which sync everything, you don't even need to think about. And we have the moving parts, we just need to talk to each other and make it work. So this is another very cool thing. Just talk to projects that are relevant to you, that do similar things, just on a different platform, on mobile, on desktop, or whatever, and make it work. Last example, or last example, I would say, the open source design community, as I mentioned, that Samtak as well and me are involved in. We're a loose collective of designers and developers as well. Anyone who cares about design in open source and wants to raise the profile of it, you can join. Any one of you can be part of it. We're at opensourcedesign.net. You will find this page. We also have a job board. You can find job postings from open source companies about design roles. You can post one. If you need a design, you can find a job. We have a forum where you can get involved. So engage with a wider audience, and come to conferences like this. I don't need to tell you all that, but and that's that. Get involved at nextcloud.com/design, or get involved with any open source project as a designer. We need more designers in open source, so come to Nextcloud or come to Open Source Design and get some stickers. Thank you. Are there any questions?
Mentioned in,
so should I'll give you the microphone.
So you mentioned in strategy number 4 that you have a conference call every Tuesday. That's Central European time.
So that's why I said like the time doesn't really matter. Like in our case, unfortunately, it's Central European time on Tuesday at 2. So it's
23
exactly. So I was actually in Japan for 2.5 months just now. So it was in the evening, like at 10, I think. So I mean, I participated, but it's a tough thing. So what you could do is, like, depending on how your community is distributed. Like for example, with open source design, we have a monthly call. And we have 2. We have one for like a more European, US sort of time zone, African time zone, and one for more Asian sort of Pacific time zone. So you could do that, for example. It's unfortunately time zones are a thing. So and it's a globe, right? We're not on a flat Earth. More questions?
You mentioned about the design review process. So are those limited to the Nextcloud project that you integrate with it, or any developer can come and request for a review?
Yes. So in our case, in the design review call that I mentioned, those are specifically related to Nextcloud and Nextcloud apps. But with open source design, for example, we have a forum. So you could ask for a review there. Or we're often at conferences. For example, I mean, we also had a track at FOSSASIA, I think in 2017, and we should get a booth up and running again, maybe next year. But we often do, we have a track every year at FOSSDEM, actually, in Brussels. And there we sometimes also have a table where we have people come to us and they can do ad hoc reviews. So, I mean, you can also maybe just, I don't know, something I'm just going to say, you can come to us and just ask like if we want to have a look at your app, and we're going to give you some hints or something. Right? Thank you.
Thanks very much. Certainly, as a FOSSASIA